Shalom, Tamar, and thanks for the plug. I get very few of those. But, well, actually, the idea that NATO is planning a massive attack on Russia is a staple in the Russian press at the moment. And a lot of Western admirers of Putin are repeating that. A lot of my readers are saying the same thing. And I suppose a clear proof of such a hostile intent is the fact that NATO has concentrated 600 troops on the Russian border, 200 of them British. So this formidable force is supposed to attack Russia and rout the Russian army. Well, to be serious about this, it's very clear that Putin has put the country on a war footing, which is a traditional stratagem for dictators who want to deflect the people's attention from a failing economy. You know, in a country where most people live from hand to mouth at best, and the pensioners don't even manage to do that. You know, the state pension in Russia is something like $300 a month or $400 a month, with prices very similar to Western prices.
So this all sounds a little bit like the Arab countries' MO, that they blame Israel. They have their scapegoat in order to deflect their thoughts off of the corruption in their own governments and their lack of...
Well, absolutely. It's a traditional strategy that's been going on for centuries. I mean, that's what people do. And very often such dictators actually go to war to sort of rebuild the spirit at the grassroots. Russia at the moment is launching new weapon systems at a rate that NATO simply doesn't match by a very, very long chalk. And those weapon systems are not just designs, they're not just prototypes, they go into mass production straight away. The Russians are spending a greater proportion of their gross domestic product on the military than just about any other major country, including such potential aggressors as China. In fact, the Russians are spending something like 6% of their GDP on defense, so-called.
Right.
And if you look at the federal budget of Russia, it's 50% that goes on the military, which is higher than just about anybody has ever spent, even at wartime.
And you have to ask yourself why. I mean, nobody's really threatening Russia. It looks like the world is going to a place where, you know, the borders are being erased and everything's becoming under one government. There's nobody really, I don't think that Obama wants to start a war there unless it's under NATO. I don't know. I mean, this is what we're going to find out during the show. But you write here that the NATO countries are actually admitting that there's a problem and that they could be overpowered by Russia. You write here on your blog, again, the name of the article you wrote is called NATO is Worried with Good Reason. You write here, according to Sir Richard, NATO would be defenseless against a Russian lightning strike at the Baltics and Poland. Putin's Western military district could establish a beachhead within hours, with massive reinforcements arriving from other areas in a day or two. And let's all remember that the Soviet Union did encompass Poland. I was actually in Poland when it was under the Soviet regime. And, you know, it's not far-fetched thinking to think that Russia could easily go in there again.
Well, you see, a dictatorship heavily depends on an ideology. And sort of back in the late 80s, early 90s, this Soviet nomenclatura discarded the communist ideology for the sake of personal enrichment. But they very quickly discovered that the country, which is basically going to pot, can't survive without an ideology. So they've come up with a replacement. And the replacement is this great Russian imperial idea The idea that Russia has God-given right to control the former Soviet space, which is first and foremost, the 15 former republics, constituent republics of the Soviet Union, but also Eastern Europe. Now, 3 of those former Soviet republics are now NATO members. And Article 5 of the NATO Charter says that an attack on one member is an attack on all.
Right.
So, if you read the Russian press, the Russian government press, which is to say the Russian press actually, because all official media are controlled very tightly, especially the TV channels. They're all saying that really all those Latvians, Estonians, and Lithuanians are theirs. And they cite, just like Hitler used to do, talking about the plight of the German minority in Poland or in Czechoslovakia, exactly the same way. Putin is talking about the plight of the Russian minority in the Baltics, and he cites the percentage of the population who are actually ethnically Russian. For example, in Narva, one of the major Estonian cities, 50% of the population are Russian. I mean, one doesn't hear too many of them complaining of not being in Russia, but that's not the point. The point is that there's this constant talk about about reclaiming the Soviet space.
Well, that's what he did with in the Crimea. He went in there, he took it. People said a peep. They did peep about it, but that was about it. There was no real serious repercussions from that. Let me read something else from your article here. You wrote here, some Canadian spies believe that Putin is openly preparing for war with the West, and his intervention in Syria is a capability test for his forces. The forces seem to be efficient enough to take over the Baltics and eastern Poland before NATO could reinforce its formidable force of a few hundred soldiers, 200 of them British, as you had said, that are stationed there. And that would establish a fait accompli, leaving NATO with only 2 response options. And their 2 response options would be, for NATO, you write, nuclear or none. In other words, they can have the nuclear option or not do anything at all. Why don't you expound on that a bit? That's kind of scary.
The nuclear option, I mean, it really doesn't need much comment because it's reasonably clear that even the use of tactical nuclear weapons will lead to an escalation. It's there are no 2 ways about it. So we're talking about a totally apocalyptic scenario, but no response at all, which I, being sort of natural glasses half empty type of a chap, I believe is much more likely. That is going to be absolutely catastrophic.
So welcome back to the show, Alexander Boot.
Thank you, Tamar. Thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
So I was asking you during the break, just to make clear, so basically you think that Russia under Putin now is really perhaps getting ready, making preparations for war?
Well, you see, I don't know for sure whether they are preparing to go to war or not. My point is that they're giving absolutely every indication that they are, which may only be for blackmail purposes, which they have done before throughout the Cold War.
Blackmail for what?
Pretend that they're ready to go to war at any time, to blackmail the West for this or that.
And what is the this or that? What is it?
Well, trade concessions, credits, technology supplies, you name it. So, all those things without which Russia would not be able to survive, actually. Mm-hmm. Or it could be the real thing. My point is that it would be criminal folly, it is criminal folly on the part of Western governments not to assume that it might be the real thing and prepare for it. Because Again, history, as the truism goes, tends to repeat itself. And if you look at the 30s, a lot of people were saying that Herr Hitler, okay, he's making some very belligerent noises, but he's not going to take on the whole world, you know. And so Western powers, specifically my country, Britain, failed to prepare for it with absolutely catastrophic consequences. I mean, we must assume that the military hysteria that's pervading every pore of Russia at the moment is for real. It's and if it's not, then so much the better.
Right. So if you just put in a search for Russia and war into Google, you're going to come up with a lot of things that are being written about this. Just 2 days ago, SputnikNews.com came out with an article. This is just 48 hours ago, and it says here, former NATO chief says Russia to invade Poland, start World War III overnight. And it says here, in a briefing report, NATO's former European chief suggested that the alliance must, quote, significantly increase the troop presence in Poland, unquote, or else Russia will catch the West by surprise with a sneak attack. And you also write, I just want to just quote for you.
I'm quoting the same man. I mean, it's General Sir Richard Shiref, who was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe.
Right.
And he was the one who produced a briefing document where he issued those dire warnings.
Right. And so you also write here, NATO members are not spending enough on the defense to rebuild the range of capabilities necessary to deter a resurgent and aggressive Russia.
Well, that's a quote from General Shiref again, and he's absolutely right. According to even the undertaking on the part of the European Union, every member is supposed to spend 2% of the budget on defense. And nobody is doing that, except maybe us, and even we're now a bit short of 2%. The United States, by comparison, is spending 4.5%. So when Donald Trump says that we're not going to come automatically to the defense of Europe because Europe doesn't want to defend itself, he's not completely without a point. We are not spending enough. I mean, speaking about Britain, we practically have no navy now for the first time in our history. France, for example, has a bigger navy than Britain, which hasn't happened since Trafalgar, since 18...
I just want to say this is very worrisome because when you don't have a deterrent factor, and if someone's back is against the law, let's say against the wall, let's say that Russia does make some type of move that's going to seriously disturb NATO. I don't know what they're going to do. Perhaps they take over a bit of Poland. I don't know what they're going to do. But when you have your back against the wall, it gets very, very dangerous. And you write here that the British Prime Minister, Theresa May's commitment to retaining the Trident deterrent must be understood. This also explains why, you say, that she's the first prime minister to confirm unequivocally that she'd be prepared to order a nuclear strike. That is very scary. And that, when you're cornered, it becomes very dangerous. People could, you're talking about nations that are nuclear. So why don't you, explain this a bit more?
Well, this is extremely scary, you see, and the reason she had to say that is because she knows that that's the only response of which we are capable. You see, that is a tremendous problem. We cannot deploy enough troops fast enough to confront the Soviet thrust, let's say across the Baltics or into eastern Poland. We just don't have the conventional wherewithal to do that. You see, so Trident, which is our, nuclear submarine deterrent, becomes the only option. And even though Theresa May said, and she is the first prime minister to do so, that she would be prepared to order a strike that might conceivably kill 100,000 people, I really don't think so. You see, they have to say that, because there's no point in having a deterrent if you say you're not going to use it. If you say you're not going to use it, then the deterrent is not going to deter anybody. So she had to say that yes, we're ready to use it, but it's a nightmare scenario that the nuclear counterstrike or preemptive strike becomes the only option. Because even throughout the Cold War, there was a sufficient NATO presence in Europe to slow down the potential Soviet advance long enough for the reinforcements to arrive. It would take months for NATO to reinforce the conventional presence in Western Europe, and if General Sheriff is talking about a strike that will take a few days, then you can see a certain time gap there.
All right. We're speaking with Alexander Boot. He's a polemist, and he writes on politics and what's happening in the world. And you can go to his website and visit it, where he wrote about possible war between NATO and Russia. And I'm looking in the chat room here, and one of our listeners, David, from the south of Israel, is asking me to ask you, Mr. Boot, what about your thoughts on the relations and positions between the Turkish President Erdogan and Putin? What is their relationship? How do you see that?
Well, that is an absolutely amazing thing, because I've written an article on that subject, comparing the situation with those two today, and the situation between Germany and Russia in the early 20s, when both found themselves in the possession of pariah states, having been on the losing side in the First World War. They immediately formed a relationship finalized in the Rapallo Treaty of 1922, which effectively enabled Germany to rebuild its military capability. I mean, they established training facilities on Russian territory, both for their tank crews and for their pilots, and so on and so forth. In exchange, they supplied Russia with the modern technology that enabled Russia to build up her defense industry and so forth. Now, Erdogan's Turkey and Putin's Russia are rapidly running out of allies in the West, and that brings them close together. The amazing thing is that on the 24th of November 2015, the Turkish Air Force shot down a Russian bomber that had violated its airspace. Now, the relationship between the two countries instantly soured. Erdogan was described in the Russian press as a fascist dictator and God knows what else. The moment Erdogan suppressed this coup, which is incidentally a very iffy proposition from all sorts of angles, suddenly the Turks declared that the pilot who shot down the Russian plane actually was one of the rebels. Well, Russia has often been described as Ivory Coast with nuclear weapons. Russia is indeed not a very advanced country economically or in any other respect, except its military strength. I mean, Russia has always dedicated most of her resources to building up her military muscle. And in that sense, it matches up with just about everyone in the world, with the possible exception of the United States. And in terms of European presence, no European country comes even close, and even the combined resources of the European Union fall far short of Russian military capability. It's for example, the Russians can very easily field about 10,000 frontline tanks right now. I mean, no great European power, us, Britain or France or Germany, have more than like 450. And in terms of the Russian technology, military technology, it has received a lot of help from the United States and everybody else with electronics and avionics and things like that. They have absolutely world-class military hardware, which they are demonstrating, by the way, in Syria, where they're pounding, everybody who wants to unseat Assad. And are doing it extremely efficiently. It's wrong to believe that because a country is backward economically generally, it's weak militarily. Because, for example, Kuwait was much stronger than Iraq economically, and yet it took Saddam's Iraq, about a day or two to overrun Kuwait. I mean, most wars in history have been won by the lean and hungry masses rather than by sort of fat
the fat cats. The fat cats, right. Well, you know what? I can say also, I mean, this is just my opinion, but it would seem to me that what Russia is missing in sophistication in weaponry or in a smaller economy, they make up for it in their grit, their gall, their muscle flexing, their aggressiveness, and Putin is no pushover. I mean, we've already seen what they've done in the Crimea, and there was no real consequence for it. And it kind of reminds me. Sorry?
No, not just in the Crimea, also in Georgia, when they launched a successful aggressive war in 2008, in Chechnya, which they bombed flat. I mean, I wouldn't sell them short as a military power at all.
Right.
I mean, they cannot compete with the West in terms of trade or in terms of general standard of living of things like that. But they can very easily match up to anything the West can offer.